Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Jillian Murphy. I'm the event planner here at Scale Computing, and today I am joined by Mike O'Neill, Senior Systems Engineer at Scale Computing, and Scott Donaldson, Director of SMB Solutions at Mobius Partners. They're here to discuss how to streamline your business resiliency plan. That being said, I'm going to pass it over to Scott to get us started.
Hi, thank you, Jillian. And again, I'll just reiterate the sentiments and thank you all for joining and giving up some time on a Thursday afternoon to learn more about Mobius and Scale Computing. Very excited about some of the things that are happening in this space. I'll just briefly share a little bit about Mobius and then turn it over. So Mobius has been around for about 20 years, predominantly in the enterprise space as a value-added reseller, as well as some specialized services around security and digital workspace and things like that. Well known in that space. So I would like to take a little time just to talk about a newer offering at Mobius, and that's our managed service division for the SMB market. And so for those that may not be familiar with managed services, it's basically a new flavor of what used to be called IT outsourcing. So basically handing over all those IT operations to a partner to help manage for you. And so this graphic just shows at a high level the kinds of things that are baked into that, such as monitoring your servers and infrastructure, providing help desk support for the end users when you need it, as well as the strategy components, things that an IT leader would do, such as a CTO or an IT director. Then we also have various other solutions that we can bring for needs that a company may have, such as new phone systems or voice over IP, maybe shifting some things to the cloud, backups, disaster recovery, Office 365. So we do all of that stuff. As well as help with special projects such as implementing new servers, opening new locations, things of that nature. And then another big pillar of what we do is vendor management. So for anyone that's ever been in the finger pointing game with numerous different providers and vendors pointing the finger at each other, we truly are the one phone call. So we can understand what the issue is and then do our triage and due diligence and then engage the necessary partner and make sure that that gets tracked through to completion. So high level, that's what we do there. If you could go ahead and flip to the next one. This just kind of digs into that a little bit more, just to highlight again some of the high level areas around cloud solutions and digital transformation. So you can go ahead and advance again. So an overview of our managed services. Again, we look at things like supporting the server, supporting the end users, doing the patching, the security solutions, and then again rounding that out with various offerings that we also bring in, again, cloud services, infrastructure projects, and then the strategy component of it as well. And move forward. So under managed services and support, touched on some of these already, such as the help desk and the patch management. Another area where we've seen a lot of traction recently is around the security front, especially with users working from home. So we have a big push around security and training those end users. We also can conduct simulated phishing attacks to see who your at-risk personnel are that would fall for those kinds of things, and we can put them through some specialized training to address those needs. We also have some solutions that are specifically catered towards risk management and HIPAA compliance for those that are either in healthcare or serve the healthcare sector. So some very interesting things we're doing around there. And go ahead and move on, please. These are some of our cloud services, and these are pretty generic, but really there's a breadth of things that we can do behind this. So backup and disaster recovery, obviously that's a hot button for everybody, particularly down where at least I office out of the Houston region. So us on the Gulf Coast, we're particularly sensitive to hurricanes and storms. So we have a lot of solutions around not only DR, but also that next point where if you'd prefer to just move things to the cloud or maybe host your servers outside, or again, looking at different options for how to consume hardware and software, we're happy to have those kind of conversations. Then mobile device management, the last point there, there's some really some interesting solutions around that, again, with so many people working remote. So that's a big area of need as well. Go ahead and move. And it leads us to one of our final ones here, which is infrastructure projects. And this is kind of where the Scale guys would come in. So we help customers with a range of projects, whether it's implementing new hardware, looking at new workstation refreshes, maybe updating security. So looking at hardware specifically, and just to kind of set the table for Scale here, a lot of customers who have been kind of down the block with virtualization and VMware, or maybe some other types of hypervisors that have maybe had some challenges with that. Or maybe you're looking at moving into virtualization or a more modernized type IT footprint. And Scale has some very interesting solutions in there. And so just to touch on some of the other things that we can do, I mentioned earlier around helping customers with office relocations and things like that, but specifically around compute and storage, we find Scale to be a very good and a very compelling solution for a lot of use cases. And so at this point, I'd kind of like to turn this over to Mike and let him go through his. And again, thank you all for your time and spending an afternoon with us to learn more about this. Mike, she's all yours.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you for being here as well. Let me get this switched over. And here we come. If I can get this to come back up for me. There she goes. Okay, cool. Thank you again for that, Scott. I appreciate that intro, and thank you for helping us here. We appreciate your partnership on all things around this and helping Scale get out to the masses, as well as we talk about a pretty cool subject today that has some importance around what we're going through in the world, I'll say. Obviously, my name here is Mike O'Neill. I am a senior systems engineer, and a cool little tidbit about me is I'm also a former customer of Scale's. So I ran what we're talking about today. I have been there, I've done that from a perspective of a customer, and now, of course, on this side as a systems engineer, helping people get on board sites, et cetera, talking through the solutions. But in the world we live in today, it's applicable in a lot of ways, because I was an IT director and I had to address business resilience. So how do we do that? Well, first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about Scale and who we are. Before we even go down that road, let's just make sure everybody's on the same page, right? So Scale Computing, we are a hyper-converged infrastructure. The company has been around since 2008, started as a storage company. But in 2012, HC3, the core product that we're going to talk about today to build that resiliency on, was introduced in 2012 at VMware, VMworld actually, which is kind of an interesting factoid, because VMworld is obviously VMware's showpiece, and we are a VMware alternative. In that case, we have our own built-in hypervisor, KVM based, so very similar to what, for instance, Google does up there in the cloud. We're leveraging the same technology. R&D for us is built out on the West Coast in San Francisco, headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana, and have thousands of customers across SMB, mid-market, distributed enterprises, et cetera, among many of the verticals as well. And then obviously what we like to tout is the fact that we are the hyperconverged product that no one knows about per se, but is the highest reviewed in terms of the actual ratings we receive. And our NPR rating is also through the roof in that regard as well. But you can go and find that information out there in the world. You don't need me to tell you about it, because what we bring to the table is a full product offering of solutions. So not just the hyperconverged side of the world, but also by partnering with other, we'll say, strategic partners out there. Like you can see some of the names on the right and the top of this slide: APC, Intel, Acronis, NEC, Parallels, LeoStream, Lenovo, et cetera. The ones we're going to concentrate on today, for the simple fact of business resiliency, are a couple key ones for us. So LeoStream and Acronis are going to be kind of where we start that conversation, because they bring some key components to add to that business resiliency plan. So why HC3 and how do we do it? We'll walk through a few slides here, kind of get an overview, introduce you, and then I'm going to jump in the cockpit and kind of show you what it looks like. So going down that road, we kind of start with the whole premise of HC3. It's meant to be simplified. It obviously is a hyperconverged environment, so it's a more modern take on your traditional 3-2-1 or reversed pyramid type setups. It's very easy to manage. It deploys in an hour or less from a standpoint of standing it up and being able to spin up virtual machines and workloads on top of us. And then, of course, key components are high availability and an autonomy, if you will. So it's self-healing. The system actually is built on top of open source Red Hat KVM, and then it leverages a state machine technology from our HyperCore operating system, as well as a block engine from the storage perspective called Scribe that is built on top of that and has many patents around it to give it the rock solid performance and efficiencies that it has today. But we have the ability to build in the resources that you need with not having to take too much to get started, but give you the ability to scale, pun intended there, without any hassles, but just very quickly and easily growing the product. You don't have to be an expert to run this. The system comes up, like I said, turns on in an hour. You basically follow some templates, fill in some blanks, and you're up and running, getting things going. You don't have to take any certifications. We do offer training, of course. If you want to get the special scale stamp of approval, we can do that for you too. But actually, usually what I like to say is through these demos, you're pretty much scale trained by the end of going through what I had to show you in one fell swoop. There's no additional licensing from a third-party virtualization standpoint. As I said, KVM is the hypervisor we use, and that's built into the product. So you don't need the VMwares of the world, the Hyper-Vs of the world. It's already there for you, built in. And anything x86 will run on top of what we have. So you can put anything on top of Scale and get it to run. The differentiators for us, it is radically simplified. It's meant to take the onus out of infrastructure, giving you as an IT admin, a sysadmin, an IT director, the peace of mind that your systems are going to stay up and running. They're always going to be available. You set it and you forget it. Getting it out of the box, a low to no touch deployment. The management is a single interface, single pane of glass, very easy to manage, very easy to find out what's going on. And as I said, the autonomy, the self-healing operations that are built in. That happens because we build the systems from a standpoint of the core functionality to be N+1 redundant. So we can actually take not just drive failures and heal and automatically correct from those, but also take entire chassis failures, lose an entire box without losing anything on the other end. The workloads come back to life without losing data, etc. It is a completely integrated platform from a virtualization, storage, and management software piece. So again, that single pane of glass, everything is right there. Out of the box, the software already has the storage configured for you. That storage is configured and combined from a standpoint of different types of disk media. So you can do all spinning disks, you can do NVMe disks, you can do SSDs, or you can do a combination of SSD and spinning disk. And we can do it on platforms that range inside from our HE150 line, which leverages the NUC chassis, an Intel NUC, all the way up through 2U chassis of Lenovo boxes, with 12 drive bays inside of them. We fill all those up, we can get 992 terabytes of storage within a single box if we need to from a raw perspective. And all of that can be mixed and matched together. We don't have to have the same motherboard, don't have to necessarily have the same CPU configuration, same RAM configuration, same chassis for the most part in that regard. There's a few rules around storage, but the flexibility of being able to scale out as you need it and giving you the ability to grow without having to forklift 6-7 years worth of stuff today when you don't know where that plane would take you. The resources has an efficiency built into it because we wide stripe and mirror across the entire set of storage. So we take those disks in each chassis, whether that be one on the NVMe NUC chassis like I was mentioning earlier, or whether that be a 4-bay chassis or a 10-drive chassis or a 12-drive chassis. We stitch all those together through the backplane, networking components, either 10 gig base T, 10 gig SFP plus, or 25 gig now with our NVMe chassis. There's no additional software licensing. As a matter of fact, 1 year of full service and maintenance, including updates, as well as 24/7, 365 support is included out of the box. You want to extend that to 3 or 5 years, we can do that as well. We can start with a single box, put that up somewhere on the edge as long as we can talk to another scale box and send the information back and forth to protect. We can do that. Or typical deployments, like I said, a 3-node cluster, talking potentially to a single node from a DR perspective, because guess what? We also have DR, or if you want to call it maybe a basic backup functionality from our data protection suite that leverages an entire VM to be brought back to life, or reach within that VM to a virtual disk level and do some file level recovery. That's built in. But it's built on 4 pillars. The HC3 platform is exactly what it's stated to be: simple, easy, rock solid. It's very simple in the fact that it has the unified management, everything, like I said, pre-configured and deploys quickly. Highly available. We talked about how it can sense the outages from a standpoint of disks or chassis and fix itself. We also have the ability from an availability on the high availability side to actually use the cloud piece to our advantage. I mentioned Google earlier. That was mentioned for a reason, and I'll get to that here in a second. Scalability, we just talked about. It's going to grow with you. We can scale out very easily, and then mixing and matching those nodes, which leads to the last really key piece of that puzzle is affordability. We can get on those small chassis, which means we can get the subsets of resources that you need just to run your workloads and be productive without going overboard, which means you don't have to spend a heck of a lot of money. That tiered storage I talked about, where we have SSD and spinning disks together in the same chassis, that's giving you the ability to have performance for a subset of storage, but everything else that doesn't need it, you don't have to pay for it and use that expensive disk. Gets you in at a lower price and overall a lower cost of operation as you stick the gear out there. But coming back kind of to the topic at base, this quote kind of spells it out. 2020 has been an interesting year. The COVID world we live in has opened a lot of eyes to where do I live in this business resiliency world? Because people went to work one day and then maybe the weekend came by or maybe it was overnight. They were told they have to go home and they can't come back. And then all of a sudden the IT teams were tasked with fixing that. Well, CIOs, if you look at this quote, they're into cost optimization. For the rest of this year, they're going to prioritize on those things that are important to the business to keep it running. And that's probably going to go on for a while, as you can see from this quote, probably into 2021. So how do we leverage that ability and how can we help put that together for them? Well, again, we're offering a solution from a business resiliency standpoint. The HC3 platform itself that I just described is a very big piece of that puzzle to start with. Because business resilience, you can see the definition here. You have to mitigate and adapt quickly. Otherwise, you can lose stuff. That's just an easy way to sum it up. And if you don't have this plan in place and you don't test this plan, you're going to be shaking off that dusty manual and figuring out how to recover from something you set up 3 years ago. Because that's what it comes down to. Now, how have we responded in regards specifically to COVID? Well, we had to react and reinvent and rebuild the way we think about things. Right off the bat, the infrastructure side. Laptops, they became the toilet paper of the IT industry, right? They were hard to find all of a sudden because everybody bought them. People needed remote access. VPNs came into play, additional workloads on top of the existing firewall workloads as additional holes through the firewall. Brings a whole new set of security concerns into the table because now you have those external networks from people's homes with who knows what's running coming through into that corporate environment. Business resiliency part of it, of course, VDI is a good conversation piece. Some people had it. Some people that don't or that didn't have it, like I said, poking that VPN through, giving things extra times. But the data security of the cyber threats has been extended because of this need. And then they have to, of course, have the ability to test it and test it effectively in a true scenario. These pieces of the puzzle are all things we can offer with our solution. The high availability and the disaster recovery, the ability to work from anywhere, that's the VDI piece that I'm going to talk about in a second. Cybersecurity, we can actively protect those assets against threats. How? We have a best-of-breed backup product, Acronis Cyber Protect, that leverages an active protect technology that will actually sense and roll back. I'll show you something on that here in a minute too. Backup in and of itself. We have the basic backup on a snapshot basis built into our technology. And then of course, scalability, because when that happens, we needed to grow systems quickly and get access to end users quickly. Adding nodes, increasing the ability for CPU, RAM, and storage at a moment's notice. Scale has that. But all that stuff can run right on top of us. That's the beauty of it. Scale is that platform to provide that base layer, that foundation for your business resiliency. Now, if we talk about the business resiliency plan, some people say they already have, or there's maybe some misnomers out there of what's really going on. I already have one. Yeah, probably you do. But have you tested it? How do you react when it happens? Are you actually coming just from a environmental, or are you potentially looking at other threats, cybersecurity issues, ransomware issues, as opposed to natural disasters, as Scott hinted at earlier, being on the Gulf Coast? I know that one well. I was there as well. I experienced this little thing called Katrina that opened my eyes to business resiliency fast. Maybe you think you don't have time for it. Well, if you don't have time, you're going to make a lot of time to fix it. The business loss from these types of events can be huge if you're not prepared for it. And sometimes, as we're seeing right now, unfortunately with COVID, if you're out of business for a while, sometimes you don't come back. So we need to protect that. Well, I'll just give them a remote VPN connection and a laptop. Okay, great. Adding to the IT overhead, managing dozens, hundreds, even thousands of those devices, not the cheapest or easiest thing in the world for those teams, not to mention inefficient. And then, of course, we talked about the VPN side of the world. Opens up a whole new world to additional cyber attacks because of that home network or unknown other end of the tunnel, shall we say. So here's what we're going to use to get this model, this solution built. Hyper-converged infrastructure, that's us, HC3. A VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, gives you flexibility at the desktop level, of course, centralizes all that update and management of it. And then the cool part, we can deliver that over HTML5 by simply poking 443 open on your firewall. Nothing else, no VPN anymore. The ransomware protection I hinted at. Best of breed, again, with that Acronis product. Active protection, very cool feature. We are integrated with both the VDI side of the world with LeoStream and Acronis. Acronis has an agentless option that we have implemented and also an agent-based option. The agent-based option is where you get the ransomware protection as well as other application level assistance from a standpoint of restoring Exchange, Active Directory, Oracle databases, more granularity in that regard. And then inherent protection for the workloads with our snapshots in our DR process. We have replication where we can actually send our snapshots across to another Scale node or up to the cloud piece we talked about earlier and restore those in seconds. Getting time back, keeping business running. That's the whole idea, business resilience. Here's kind of how that looks from a standpoint of scale to scale. We leverage the inherent technology, the backup protection suite of the data protection suite, I should say, and involve the basic backup I talked about earlier. Inherently, we're going to have snapshots, differential snapshots, so very efficient in that respect, plus dedupe compression, a piece of the puzzle to make it even more efficient on the storage. You can bring those in. They will live on your cluster if you just have a cluster locally. Add a NAS, maybe you have an old server, something like that. We can export copies of those VMs off in a KVM format to that storage. Put another replication target locally. We can now put the snapshots onto another single scale box and recover those in a matter of seconds. Or go off-site. Maybe you have a second location that's far enough away from harm's way where you can replicate that across. Because being a differential block engine at the snapshot side of the world, we're very efficient. So just those change blocks are what's going to get sent so you don't have a lot of latency to worry about getting the data over there. Or you leverage the cloud piece. The cloud piece is very interesting. Again, we have a partnership with Google. We call it Cloud Unity. Basically, you have your cluster sitting in your data center, doing what you normally do, and then you set up the snapshots on a schedule, so they take them on a certain time-by-time basis, send those up via replication to the Google platform. Very cool part here is that Google platform, GCP, is connected over a layer 2 VXLAN overlay, which gives you LAN over WAN performance. So imagine extending your subnet into the sky by simply leveraging the product that we have built into there, making your life simplified, not having to mess with all that networking, recovery, etc. It's there, it's built in. Now, the VDI side. Who did we partner with? Why did we partner with them? LeoStream. LeoStream is one of the oldest from a standpoint of the original orchestration side of the world to be built, and leverages a similar mentality to Scale from a simplistic and efficient manner to be able to deliver things quickly, easily. Again, we are directly integrated. So all of the operations from a standpoint of spinning up VMs, scheduling them to spin up, scheduling them to tear down, giving people access is done through a simple UI, and it's all managed on a single virtual machine that runs on top of Scale. If you want to add that gateway piece that gives them the ability to go through a website to get to their workloads, that's just a second piece of a second VM to run. But again, very simplified in that provisioning methodology, which gives everybody the ability to get in there. And then, of course, just like Scale, it's very affordable. It's quite a bit, matter of fact, 50 to 70% less expensive than a similar VMware Citrix solution that's out there. And we can leverage that on a perpetual basis, either a user-based or a workstation-based model. Because this model, the traditional methodology, we feel is not the best way to do it going forward because of all those other pieces that become a challenge, become a security hole, and then think of those employees that now have to think differently. We all have some of those employees out there that don't necessarily deal well with change. You got to go here to get this application now, it's not here. Okay, well, it's on my desktop, where's my VPN? How do I turn on my VPN? How quickly can you get me what I need? I've been down for a week. Well, so have the other 300 people we're trying to get going. Imagine a world where you don't have to do that. You just say, okay, go to this IP address, type in these credentials, boom, you're into a Windows environment. This is kind of an overview of the setup. I won't really go through this in too much depth because there's a lot of pieces and there's more bullet points to it. But the long and the short of it, this is a remote desktop option or a VDI implementation that works for anyone from anywhere. So instead of work from home, work from anywhere, because everybody does now. Some people go outside. Some people are using schools' Wi-Fi's. Some people are using restaurants. Some people are using coffee shops. You get the point. Wherever you go, as long as you have an HTML5 browser, we can get you in. Sets up very quickly, under an hour, because this gateway is actually an image that is pulled down by a couple very quick commands on our side and stood up automatically. Then you put your local IP specific information and set up who gets what, where, and how, and you're golden. We'll talk a little more on it. Ransomware. We talked about it. More targets are available now than they ever have been because of the openings people have with this new COVID-19 era. As you can see, it's increased 148%, and it's just going to keep getting higher because more and more people are working in those remote environments, and those bad eggs have the ability to get in and see that and do their dirty work. So how do we help protect against that? That's where we bring the Acronis piece back in that we talked about just a second ago. there was a video. Acronis gives us a couple different options, from just your traditional, I want a backup, to I want a backup and I want it locally, and I want it in the cloud, and I want it across the country in the data center. Multiple targets. Those targets can be physical. Those targets can be virtual. Again, in the cloud, we have gateways that are part of this package. So you pick who you want to use, the cheapest storage you can buy, set it up. We'll get it out there. Acronis has their own storage, their own data center they use for that product as well they can do. Basically, which way do you want to do it? Long-term archiving, short-term recovery, has a conversion methodology that recovers it, and that backup file gets converted at the end of the process to another hypervisor if you have some old gear laying around and you want to test it in that regard. The agents I talk about gives you a little more added flexibility. Agentless is there, and that's going to get you what you need from a backup perspective. But if you want to get down to the granular file level backups I talked about, or the enhanced ransomware protection with active protection, then we leverage that component, put that agent on that operating system, or mix and match. You can do a little of both. But that agent is very cool. And here's a little demonstration that I'll put on. Quick little video, it's about a minute long, but I'll talk you through it, what's happening here, because this is really, really a very intriguing thing that happens. I'll mute him. You all know the story. Crypto lockers, those types of events. People get a lovely email that they're very intrigued by, and it's got an attachment. They get it, and they decide, oh, this is going to be awesome. I love Game of Thrones. Of course, as soon as that triggers, what happens? The bad stuff starts going through. File names get encrypted. Boom. You get the message, and the next thing you know, give me some Bitcoin, right? I've seen it. Unfortunately, I had it hit once. But luckily, I was running Scale. If I would have had this, it would have been even better protected. Because this, as you can see, is just a simple setting within the back-end setup of that agent. You turn it on, and now we go back through the same process. End user gets that lovely email, clicks on that package, opens it, starts going through their stuff and looking at stuff, and well, guess what? The system, that agent, flagged that, stopped it, rolled it back. Now all those files still working, did not get encrypted. Their world is happy just by having that agent installed. It protected itself. So business resiliency within the backup cybersecurity piece handled by Acronis and handled very well. Overall, from a standpoint of what we talked about, when you put the whole package together, the solution we're offering, it could fit any size deployment. I talked about how we can put down to those tiny Nook HE150 devices all the way up through 2U 5250 servers, cheap and deep all the way up to big and depth. Heck of a lot of performance, all NVMe, mix and match, do what you need, but it's all their same self-healing components within each one. Something ever goes wrong, by the way, service and support 24/7, 365, skipping down in the middle a little bit. 20 plus years of IT experience on this end, dating myself, I know, but Scale is by far the best IT vendor I've ever worked with. Part of a big reason why I get to talk about it today. Something ever goes wrong, there's really only 3 components you have to worry about. It's going to be a hard drive. Those are hot swappable. We'll send you a new one next business day air. The power supplies, same thing, redundant and hot swappable. We'll send you a new one next day air. Third component is the entire chassis. We're not going to make you rip it open. We're going to send you a new chassis if the motherboard goes wrong, if the CPUs go bad, if the networking card goes wrong. Something goes out in that box, we're going to send you a new box. And guess what? Next business day air. That N+1 I talked about earlier gives us the ability to keep running in the event of environmental or other failures. So that self-healing piece is huge for that. The storage pooling, I talked about it. Nothing you have to do except turn it on. No carving out of LUNs, no creating storage, no carving out the different spaces you need. Even in those tiered environments, the system has heat map technology built in. That heat map technology will give you the ability to let the system manage those pieces of data, the hot blocks as we'll call them, that are more active, and put that and keep that on the SSD tier, and then take those cold blocks or those files that don't move around a lot and change, and put those, offload those to the spinning disk, cold storage, built in, or you tweak it. Hypervisors there, you don't have to get anything else. No third-party licensing, no additional licensing of any kind for that matter. The cloud piece, the native built-in data protection suite offerings within Scale, adding Acronis, adding the VDI piece. All of this with very little expertise knowledge, because everything is built to be simple, everything is built to be managed in this single pane and this single platform. So let's look at it. Let's stop talking about it. Sneak peek there too. This is a cluster of 3 nodes. Notice I am just in an HTML5 interface, logged into a single IP. Each of the nodes gets their own IP when we set this up. Setup process is very simple. Get the box, rack, and stack. When you take them out of the boxes, you're plugging in networking cables for the back plane. That's the storage and node-to-node configuration side or communication side, and then the LAN side, of course. You don't have to mess with a vSwitch, by the way. If you have VLANs, then you trunk and tag down into our LAN ports. If you don't, if you're flat, then don't worry about it. All that done, fire it up. After the IP addresses are on there, tell it to create a cluster, and it takes about 15, 20 minutes after that fact, and you're up and running. You can bring in your workloads from your foreign environments if you have those running elsewhere. There is a utility import mechanism built in, right here as a matter of fact. You just fill in these blanks, tell it where that export was sent to. There's downtime associated here, of course, because when you do export, you have to shut it off. But we basically suck that exported image in using a matching set of resources on our end and convert it at the same time. If you have a concern with downtime, or you have some larger storage footprints and you don't want to mess with the slow import approach, there's a product we resell on a node by, or excuse me, a workload by workload or virtual to physical or P2V methodology if needed. So one off, one at a time. It's called HC3 Move. It's made by Carbonite. But that basically leverages a server sitting in the middle of both sides. We create the template that matches the specifications on the Scale side from a standpoint of what's running in production. So OS, resources, match that up, tell it to go, it starts synchronizing. When everything's up to date and matches, it gives you the ability to fail over. It says, are you ready to fail over? You tell it yes at that point, whenever that time might be, and all you have to worry about is it doing its final synchronization and then a turn off and a turn on. So it shuts off production in that environment, turns off, and then turns back on into the Scale environment. So it's just going to be more like a power blip, and then you're done. It's all migrated over. Of course, the third methodology involves creating a new VM and moving data. So how do we get to that point, and how do we read this lovely interface to tell us how to do that? Well, first and foremost, what we're going to look at is the available resources across the top. And that's these first 3 gauges specifically that tell us the amount of CPU, RAM, and disk that is in, and then, of course, what we're using from a percentage standpoint of that. And these are in raw capacities. But you can see here also some of the efficiency in play. If you take a look at the RAM footprint, for instance, you'll notice on each box up here on the right, it shows in the corner 125 gigs of RAM. That's available RAM to put towards workloads. Each of these particular boxes I'm running at here has 128 gigs of RAM. So that less than 4 gigs of RAM per box to run HyperCore and Scribe under the covers, the software we leverage. And then under the covers as well, to give you an idea of what that looks like from a disk perspective, here you go. Here's the tiered scenario I talked about. 3 spinning disks, 1 SSD disk. Stitch those together with that backplane. We got 2 tiers of storage. We'll show you how we leverage those 2 tiers in a second. But as long as we see green on these gauges across the top, I am in good standing with the HA gods from on HyperCore and Scribe within the HC3 platform, in other words. We see green, we're good. I can absorb an entire node going dark and keep on trucking. Because what happens in that case is the system would sense the outage. Say it's node 3. All these workloads, these white, by the way, are all VMs running. When it senses that outage, it would say, okay, let's send that heartbeat one more time. Let's make sure. The outage says, yep, it's really there. Okay, we're going to trigger something. So after about 2 minutes, it's going to trigger the last known good memory footprint from these VMs and move them to the remaining space on the other 2 nodes. And then it turns them back on. You got an email alert that says something happened. I had to crash this box and we need to fix it. But the we need to fix it part already happened in the background because of the state machine technology that recognized it and moved everything around. A drive fails, it'll notify you if just a single drive fails, or predictively pulls it out before it fails. When you get those notifications, that's when you can call into support. By the way, support answers within 10 seconds. They're awesome. And they're all level 1, level 2 engineers that can help you, not just a help desk queue to put in a ticket. But they'll get you in the door. Sometimes they'll ask you, okay, let me do it for you. Let me check what's going on. In those cases, all you have to do is go into our control center, go into the remote support section, put in a code. Now they can call in on your behalf and help you. Get in the back door, take a look at what's going on, fix things. So that's a piece of the puzzle that's huge and built in. Now, once we have everything here the way we like it, say it's set up, how do I get a new VM started like I talked about a second ago? Very easy, hit the plus sign. When I hit that plus sign, it's going to bring in a box. Just a template to fill out, really. You give it a name. So I'll say, I'm going to call this one Mobius 1. Give me an app server. I'm going to put it in a grouping or a tag. I'm going to call this a Mojo so I can find my Mojo. Keep my workloads organized, filter, be able to do things and find things quickly. Last couple boxes here in the middle, these boxes are used to basically tell you what's booting so we can assign good drivers and make sure that virtual instance is running efficiently. So if it's not Windows, we tell it it's not. But as I said, anything x86 based, we're going to be able to spin up. Next step, of course, is resource assignment. How much CPU horsepower, how much RAM footprint, and we'll go 12. And then here's where we carve out that storage from everything we were presented. And when I say presented, that basically just means I put in numbers out of that total queue. So we said we had 37 terabytes just about across the board up top, if you saw that. I'm going to put a second drive and maybe even a third from a virtual disk standpoint, just to show us the ability how we can mess with that tiering and make performance on one end and no performance on the other. Final piece is just a booting ISO. What are we booting from? As you can see, got a whole bunch loaded. We have a media repository built in that will hold these for you until you need them. So I can go wherever I need to. We'll say 2019 server, perfect. I hit create. The system from this point, that state machine technology we talked about, takes over. It's going to create that template, stitch everything together, put in a nice little post-it note looking thing here at the top, and give us the ability to tweak it, give us the ability to change, give us the ability to turn it on, whatever we want to do at this point, it's ours. And by that storage I mentioned, if I click on disk up here, get details on how you're leveraging it. So it gives you details, but there's no management again. This is just all informational for you. To the point of the efficiency on it as well, because you say we have snapshots. Dedupe and compression is a big piece of that, giving us space back to keep our storage efficient. And then also a snapshot look, if you will, at the provisioning and how we're going to be able to grow that if we fill everything up. All at your fingertips there. You'll see here I can tweak now. This card, Mobius 1, has been created from a standpoint of being a template VM, ready to go. You know what, 2? Yeah, I went 8. Save some space, save some resources. I can look at our devices. So the ISO we loaded in here for 2019 is right there. We have the driver ISO that gets loaded automatically as well. And then, of course, the virtual disks we assign, 100 gigs, 500 gigs, 2 terabytes. We could tweak, add more. I talked about the vSwitch not being necessary. Here's where you would actually go in and configure that VLAN if you have multiples that you just want attached to. Add additional networking cards from a virtual standpoint to get more VLANs added. If you want to at this point too, you can tell the storage how to perform. Let's say this 500 gigs is very important. I can do this while it's running, but since we're here, I'll talk about it. 500 gigs, right? We got that. I talked about how it will tier automatically from a priority of heat. Here it is. The heat priority is set at 4. That's the default in the system. It comes in at a 4 if we have a tiered scenario with mixed storage on both ends. So the system will take care of it, move the hot blocks off. And by the way, when I'm saying it, I'm meaning use, because we are actually actively living and breathing on the SSDs. We're not caching. So this data, this 500 gigs is so important. I want it to live there all the time. Well, guess what I do? I take the ball and I run it up. Some fun terminologies in there, of course. Get to a 10, it gets ludicrous. Go to 11, it just literally goes to 11. Spinal tap on. Real world, back it off. Let some small blocks fall off if they're not important. But you hit update. Now this 500 gigs, and only this 500 gigs on this virtual machine, are going to be pulling from that SSD all the time. Conversely, the 2 terabytes, cheap and deep storage, files, pictures, whatever, don't really leverage SSD, and I don't want them to, go the other way, turned off. I hit update, that's done. Now, if I really like that setup, of course, power button's the next thing. When I click that power button, this is where the state machines take over again. I don't have to tell it where to go. The system's going to look at what's going on, and from an efficiency standpoint, a load balancing standpoint, if you will, it's going to actually fire this thing up on the best node possible, probably node 2 here in the middle, if I had to guess. It'll fire it up just like that. So if I click these arrows, you didn't see it, but now you will. It's running right there on node 2 in the middle, Mobius one. I'll prove that it's running, so you don't think I'm just making this up. Clicking on the console button directly below that power button, it brings up the glorious, wonderful world of Windows, getting booted up for the very first time. Ta-da, magic. In other words, it takes 30 seconds or less to get a VM created. Very quick, very easy, very efficient. Those arrows, by the way, that's live migration. We can move virtual machines on the fly without shutting things down, without taking users and kicking them out, which comes in very handy for another feature I'll talk about really fast, updates. This is probably one of my favorites because in my world as an IT administrator, time was very important. And I didn't like coming in after hours. I didn't like coming in on weekends and holidays, but sometimes, a lot of times, you had to do it. Kicking people out, making sure they're not in. Well, guess what? On this infrastructure, you don't. None of that applies. You click one button. When you click on this, there's usually some updates available within here, some release notes. We're up to date at the moment, of course, but you'd have an apply button. Matter of fact, let me show you what that looks like. I'll go to one of my other clusters. Oh yeah, we can connect to other clusters. See them from here, control them from here, jump to them from here. This comes in handy with the replication I'll show you in a minute. But when you jump into this other side, this particular one has an update that it needs. Click on update available. There you go. Release notes. I go to that hyperlink, it tells me what's new. If I want to apply it, I click apply update. When I do that in a 3-node cluster, for instance, it's going to automatically start moving these virtual machines over to the other space. And it's going to do that because we, again, we're green. We're in good graces with the high availability. Once it does all that, this is another key component. Because we are the stack owner of everything in that box, including the physical box itself, you only call Scale, by the way, if anything ever goes wrong. You don't have to call multiple vendors. One phone call to make, therefore we apply one update. So the firmware of that box, our hypercore operating system, the Scribe underlying block engine, the hypervisor, and all the drivers and components in between there as well. Single update. When we push it to go, it moves these out of the way, vacates the first node, applies it, does reboots as it needs to, and then moves on to node 2 and repeats the process to node 3, all the way up to 8 nodes in a cluster, by the way. So imagine the time you get back, not telling users to get out, not coming in on holidays or weekends, to actually concentrate on getting workloads and maybe even take some time off, get a vacation. That's what I did. Now, once this is all running, we got our VM going. So you can see here, we're waiting to install Windows. I'll tell it to go. Just get some data written so we can see some stuff happening. When that's running, now I can protect it. How do I do that? Again, business resiliency, built in, part of our data protection suite. The basic backup functionality starts with clones. Here we go, create a clone. A clone is a copy, right? These could be used maybe prior to an update. I want to take a clone out and test it, so I don't have to mess with production. I give it a name, I hit clone. It's going to bring another post-it note or tile to life right next to this. And once that comes to life, of course, I can tweak that as well. I could change anything I need to from a storage parameter, RAM, CPU, or more importantly, in this case, networking. I'd come in here and say, okay, just for purposes of not doing a duplicate, let's disconnect that, or change the VLAN, etc. But this is now yours to do what you will. A little sandbox environment built in. No data at this point has been duplicated. No resources are duplicated until you turn it on. We're just using pointers down at the block level to hold on to this information to know where it came from. Snapshots work in the same capacity. Click on the camera icon, give it a name. There we go. Let's do this one more time. So, okay, we're going on Windows, see that it's still running. Take another snapshot, give it a name. Why I took two is just so you can see the difference here, because I took them side by side simultaneously. You can see that we have an initial set of snapshots. There's 3 there because that clone starts the process. It'll drop off. But what you can see is the initial VM itself, shall we say. And then when that drops off, it'll reorg itself. And you can see no change to the next snapshot because I took it right after. So very efficient because of the block level storage. All this is built in. You can schedule these to happen automatically. Select a schedule. These are at your discretion. This one's going every 6 hours to give you an idea. I look at this, go to Momojo, show you it's every 6 hours, but very cool. You can do this however you want and assign a different schedule to every single VM if you want to. Not only that, if we're going to start talking about the protection to the other side, retention periods, how long are we going to keep them so they'll roll off, not fill up my storage? And you can have different retention on different sides. Very cool stuff there as well. Once that's set up, I assign that schedule. And then how do I get it to the other side we talked about? Over to here. That's just as easy. You'll see another section right here, set up replication. You saw me get in there and see that list. Just know the IP address and the login credentials to that other side. Join that cluster to this side. Tell it that's going to that one. Hit replicate. And then on this side, I come over and put my filter in. There we go. You'll see this pop up. Mobius 1 backup files coming across. Snapshots more specifically. And if you need to use them, same cloning functionality brings them to life. And then if you ever have to fail back, you replicate in reverse. It remembers the original data, only needs the change blocks. Very efficient. Very, very efficient in that respect. Now on top of that as well, we talked about the Acronis piece. This is what it looks like, by the way. Just to prove to you, this is a real product. This is a cool part we get to see. When you spin it up and you tell it to add a new one, you can actually go in there and see that Scale Computing is agentless built into this product. I talked about VDI, another component. This is a fun one too. How easy is it to get connected? Well, I just sign in with my credentials through an HTML5 browser, and then I connect to my workload. Not the one I already had open though. All we're doing, again, is punching a 443 port through, and now all of a sudden, guess what I'm going to have here? A Windows desktop that's running on top of Scale, protected by Acronis, available through HTML5 using port 443. So full circle, business resiliency, built on Scale and HC3, brought to you by Mobius. Complete solution, protect your business, do it easily, quickly respond, quickly get you back to life. With that, I can open up some questions.
Mike, I think you hit on almost all of the questions that I'm seeing come through live, but since we are almost at the top of the hour, I do want to bring this one up because I think it's for both you and Scott. We have someone who's interested in the VDI solution. What would be the next steps in getting started to see if it would be a good fit for their organization?
From the Scale side, I would actually pass it back to Scott and have you guys reach out to him, and Scott can get us involved because we will size it out. We will talk about the use cases, talk about, obviously, Scott has some components he can build in to help you get there from a standpoint of implementation and other services on top to help you get it up running quickly. Anything
Absolutely.
to add, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. You took the words right out of my mouth. Please get in touch with us. We have a process we would go through, yet just like Mike said, to identify those workloads and help build out the solution. Be happy to do it. Great job, Mike. Thank you for the presentation. Awesome covering that. And just look forward to working with you guys. If anyone else has questions, feel free to follow up with us.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks, Scott. Everybody, have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. You have a good one.